Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest version of Tales from Outer Space, where I take an HFY story from somewhere around the internet and read it aloud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Like, subscribe, and all that YouTube comf to help this video and channel grow. Anyways, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I would just like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Datamagnet and Bob the Dragon. Thank you again. And now, on to the story. Story number 1. The Most Terrible Predator, written by Rosie013. There was something not quite right with the humans, or more specifically, their claims of being descended from predators. During their introduction to the Galactic Council, they made many fabulous and impressive claims. There was absolutely no doubt that they were suitable for membership. However, some of these claims were just a little too good to be true. Just a touch too, fantastical to be real. None of their member species blamed them, of course. Who wouldn't talk up their species' achievements with the entire known galaxy watching? It wouldn't be the first time a species tried to pull a fast one over on the council. So while the politicians nodded and applauded where appropriate, behind the scenes, many different intelligence agencies worked hard to find proof of these claims, or at least evidence for or against them. None more so than the claim that the humans were endurance predators. They simply lacked the biological tools amongst the predatory sapiens for that fact to be accepted at face value. The internal digestion biology had been confirmed. They were in a rare category of true omnivores, but that alone didn't make them predators. It wasn't unknown for a species to be scavengers, or even specialize in stealing kills from other predators native to their home world. No claws, no fangs, no natural camouflage. Oh, and they were pacifist herd creatures. That's not typical predatory behavior either. So when Gazip spotted what he thought was a human actively hunting without knowing it was being observed, it was a big deal to the intelligence groups. Humans had allowed the council observers onto their hunting trips, but these had reeked of flashy showmanship and false bravado. Nor had these trips been successful enough to provide for more than a few humans at a time, let alone a decent-sized population. Unobserved, the council could get a real insight into the human predatory behaviors and methods, if they truly even existed. This particular human was on the outskirts of one of the human colonies, just one of the many settlements being quietly watched while the negotiations to join the council went on. It stood knee-deep in a body of water, dressed strangely and with a box of tools of some sort nearby. In both of its hands it held what at first glance was an overlarge version of a combustion weapon that the humans had so loved. As it made thrashing gestures with the firearm, Zip noticed that it was not suitable for a projectile, as it bent 1/3 along its length. As the human began some actions at its base, reloading perhaps, when out of nowhere a small fish leapt out from the river and hung in mid-air. The humans hadn't declared that they had any kind of kinetic technology. This would force a revise of their military might, not to mention question why they were conceding such a high-level technology, or using it for something as trivial as hunting, of all things. As Zip got closer, it became clear that the firearm was in fact a simple stick of sorts, and that there was no kinetic technology, as the fish was suspended from a near-invisible line of thread. He knew at the other end of the live feed that he was relaying, the office teams would be releasing a huge exhalation of breath in relief as a false positive. Even with these revelations, there was still much to be learned from the human hunting methods. The human had taken a fish off the line and was tending to his tools when he did the most unexpected of all things. He dropped it. Free from capture, the fish fled quickly and successfully. Zip looked on in surprise as the clumsy human stared into the depths into where his meal had disappeared, with a disappointed, thoughtful look. This human clearly wasn't a great hunter of his people. He persevered anyway, throwing the small simulated insect observed to be on the end of the thread into the water over and over again in the hunt for more fish. He failed mostly, but occasionally tricked a fish into capture. And every time, after stopping to measure how many meals that particular fish would probably make, its thrashing freed itself from the human's clumsy grip, falling into the knee-deep water below. It took all of Zip's willpower to not laugh out loud. At one point, the frustrated human even made a move that looked like it would take a bite out of a particularly large-bodied specimen. But it too escaped unharmed before the deed was done. It just got funnier and funnier. No matter the fish, big or small, silver or brown, they all escaped to safety. As daylight began to dwindle, the human climbed out of the water, sorted his tools, and left. Zip took a few extra moments to compose himself before heading back to the observation post. Even though it had all been recorded for the analysts to pore over, his report was still needed, and it would say exactly two things. Firstly, yes, humans were confirmed predators. Most importantly, they were the most terrible predators the galaxy had ever known. End of story. Story number 2. Fire in the Hole, written by Rosie013. Gorag looked across the cafeteria table at the smugly grinning human. The latest bet had to be a trap. The last few bets had been way too easy. Now the hairless herbivore was suggesting double or nothing. It wasn't just the human's stupid face, but its eyes seemed to be smiling. Definitely a trap. But what else was Gorag to do? He was representing his entire homeworld here. As the latest species to be indoctrinated into the galactic community, his kind was still new, untested. As a Death Worlder, it was his responsibility to not only make a good and peaceful first impressions, but to unsubtly remind the others that his people were stronger in almost every way. So naturally, when the herbivore species had challenged him to an eating competition, he had hardly said no. It would be a good way to prove dominance, and get a little food-based cultural exchange with this bold individual. Human, it called itself. It had then smiled at him, a facial gesture that clearly meant the same thing between our people, and announced that it was also a Death Worlder. No tusks, no claws, and the very soft-looking skin. There was no way that it could back up its claim. The challenge was personal now. He would beat the stupid human in his own game so hard that it would be begging for mercy. But it hadn't happened. The food had come quick and fast, and the contestants taking turns to introduce the other to the food native to their respective homeworlds by sharing the dish. Gorag would never admit it, but he had actually lost count of how much the two of them had eaten. It had been quite an experience, and a sizable crowd of onlookers had gathered. Even if he lost now, his people would have gained some measure of respect from those watching his feats. He wouldn't lose, of course. He had nearly lost the contents when eating the heavily solanine-laced tuber from the human diet, but had managed to push through. He had gotten his own back when the human hesitated at the traditional dish of zingabayan, or ginger, as he called it after a tentative sniff. Despite its ridiculous claim, the human was admittedly tough. Finally, the human had declared that it was full and double or nothing on one last challenge. A little fruit for dessert. Something called a Carolina Reaper. A small, red, pleasant-smelling fruit so small that it was almost a berry. Trap or not, Gorag would not lose now. His pride and wallet couldn't afford it at this point. He tossed the fruit into his tusk ball and he began to chew. It burnt! It felt like he had eaten a hot coal. No! Put his tongue on red-hot steel, like a million needles in his face, like chewing on broken glass. Without warning, he began to cry. He tried swallowing the horrible fruit anyway. The damned human had fed him capsaicin of all things. My kind of maniac species willingly ate the stuff. The crowd was going wild. Some watching in shock at all, but most were enthusiastically cheering him on. There were even medics waiting to the sidelines now. it belatedly occurred to him that he might not be the first person to try human food. The realization spurred his anger. He had been walked right into this. He would show them all and push through. After a few long, agonizing, burning minutes in his own personal purgatory, Gorog opened his mouth to show the human that he had won. The human just smiled and said to meet him back here in a cycle's time, before pushing away his untouched plate and getting up to leave. Gorak angrily grabbed a hold of the hairless herbivore and demanded his winnings. He had gone through hell to win, and there was no way the human could just slip away without paying. The human smiled again, but something about it this time sent off warning bells in Gorak's head. The human carefully explained that this was only the first half of the Carolina Reaper's effects, and that the second half would be experienced soon at the other end of the digestive tract. The crowd fell silent. As the tears flowed forth anew at the realization, Gorak knew that he had lost to his fellow Deathwelder. The dastardly human had never intended to eat his own death fruit. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.